There are a lot of myths about Athena. She was very active and she interacted with people a lot, more than most other gods. And I think that she was considered very useful to people by the Greeks in particular. She was a useful god. And in fact, if you walk around any city in Western Europe, one of the gods that you see most frequently is little heads of Athena. This is on libraries and stuff, because she's associated with certain civic virtues. But there are some core myths that I want to address. There are basically 4 areas that I want to look at. So the first is her birth, which is really interesting. Lynn mentioned this yesterday, but I'll just go over it again. Most of the other gods were stuck in Saturn's stomach or born in some other way, but Athena had a very special birth in that she was conceived between Metis, who's the goddess of cunning, and Zeus, who's the king of the gods. But then he had to swallow her to keep her from being beaten up by Hera. And so she was born, not from his stomach though, and this is the important part, she was born from his head, right? And you need to, if you keep this in mind while you're thinking about Athena, it's actually one of the most useful images to do with her, that she's not born from the womb, she's not born from the leg like Dionysus, she's born from the head. So what does that mean? It means that she is a goddess of mind. She's like an actual idea coming out of his head. And she's also associated a lot with the gaze. So we'll talk about that, and vision. I'll talk about that later on. And just on the point of Dionysus, who is her half-brother, I guess you could say, Zeus gave birth to Dionysus from his leg and from Athena from his head. And Dionysus is what happens when you lose your mind, is Dionysian, losing your mind. And Athena's the opposite of that. She's all about the mind and brains and intelligence. So she's called the goddess of wisdom. But I think we should consider calling her the goddess of intelligence, actually, because that seems to be more what she's about. Okay, so that's the first part of her story that I think is really interesting and important to keep in mind. And we'll come back to this idea of her being about the head. The other thing that she did, the other important part of her story, is, of course, that she was the helper of heroes. Right? So she helps heroes do their thing. And if you've read the Odyssey, you will know that you could just as easily call that the Athenery or the Pallasy, because she is so active in that. She actually runs the show. She's bringing back and forth between Odysseus and his homeland in Ithaca. She's dealing with his son. She's telling him what to do. And it's an interesting story. Just to sum it up very briefly, why is she so involved? It's because initially she's on the side of the Greeks, of course. She's Athens, blah, blah, blah. Of course, it's her city. She's on the side of the Greeks in the Trojan War. She helps them. But then one of them, Ajax, commits a terrible crime. He rapes Cassandra, who we know about from Cassandra's vision. She can see the future, but nobody believes her, which is an idea that we'll come back to. While she's in Athena's temple, right? She's holding on to the goddess, and they drag her off and ravage her. And Athena gets really angry at this, and she says to Poseidon, she says, I want you to really mess things up for these Greeks and make it very difficult for them to get home. And then we get into the Odyssey. The other ones have a terrible time too, but they're not so interesting. Her relationship with Odysseus is interesting because she loves Odysseus initially. And she tells him, she says, why does she like him so much? She likes him because she says, you're like me. You're really cunning and you're really clever. And I can see that your mind is really interesting. So she likes him initially, and then Ajax does this crime and she punishes all the Greeks. After about 10 years, she starts to feel sorry for him. And she begins to remember that she liked him before. And that's when the Odyssey, the actual storytelling part of the Odyssey kicks in, when she's helping him to get back to Ithaca, because he's been stuck with Calypso for years. And at the same time, she's also, because of course she's a goddess, she has golden sandals, she can, whiz around, which her golden sandals are one of her attributes, that she can kind of go anywhere with them. She goes to Ithaca, where Penelope is, who is weaving, which is an important concept, this idea of weaving. We'll get back to that again. And she tells Penelope to go look at her suitors. She organizes the whole thing. Anyway, eventually we know it all ends happily ever after, unless you happen to have been a suitor of Penelope, in which case it ends really badly. But Odysseus does get home, and he gets back together with his wife and his son. So it's kind of a happy ending. And this is due to Athena's intervention, which is continuous all the way through. She's intervening. She's running the narrative of that story. Okay, so that's the second thing I wanted to talk about. Famously, she's got the Aegis, right? Because her other hero, who she worked with, essentially, we can say she works with them, was Perseus. And to cut a very long story short, she helps him cut the Medusa's head off, and she gets it on her shield. And she does this by, he cuts her head off by holding up his shield so that he can see her in the shield, because the Gorgon's gaze turns you to stone. Okay? And what does the Gorgon have coming out of her head? She's got snakes coming out of her head. So again, we've got this idea of these snakes coming out, but they're not, of something coming out of the head that's unnatural, which is the same as Zeus. Zeus has Athena come out of his head, but she's kind of marvelous. And also the other thing about Athena is she comes out perfectly formed. Yeah, so she comes out like, as a perfect thing. So you see pictures of her when she's coming out with her little helmet and everything. It's cute. Like a tiny, I was going to say Barbie, but that's wrong. Action girl. Wonder Woman, kind of. So where was I? With the Medusa's head. Now, this has been discussed as, she's complicit in the patriarchy, that she cuts off the Medusa's head, isn't this terrible, etc., which it could be. But it depends how you interpret it, really. Because what she does is she takes that female rage and she puts it on the shield and she uses it. Yeah, so it's contained. She manages to contain the rage and direct it with the shield. That's one way of looking at it. And it's interesting that the Medusa is created also from a rape in a temple. And that's how she becomes this, that's why she's turned into this monster. Anyway, okay, next one. The next idea that I wanted to address, let me go back one, if I can. Oh, I can't. Never mind. Is the idea of the city. Athena was chosen by Athens to be their patron deity because she beat Poseidon. And she did this, and that's why you see the owl on the Athenian coin. And there was famously a really huge statue of her in Athens, and she is associated, I believe that she's associated with democracy, which we will see. But first of all, I wanted to just show you some people who've got very strong Pallases. Okay, so I looked, one way of thinking about astrology is, or these the asteroids or whatever you're thinking about, is just to think, well, who should have a very strong Pallas? And obviously, really good generals should, right? Because what is she for? What does she have? She has this gaze. She can, strategic vision is what she is the goddess of. And she's the goddess of war, but not in the sense of going around and, bashing people over the head, in the sense of having a plan. Because Athena has always got a plan. So she can see far, Someone like Mars can only see just in front of his face. Yeah, he can only see what's there. Athena can see far and wide. And that's why she has this incredible strategic ability. So if you look at the charts of generals, it's not the ones who are like good old boys bashing around. It's the ones who are really famous for having good strategy. And actually, she's really strong. And I know Lynn was saying that she kept on finding that Juno wasn't. She kept on finding Juno in Scorpio. Well, I think Pallas is really strong in Aquarius. Okay, so she keeps on coming up in Aquarius. So it's interesting that Patton and Rommel, who were fighting against each other, both have these strong Pallases, and both in Aquarius. And they were doing the North African campaign, and then Rommel got beaten, at D-Day. He made a mistake. He was, like a goalie at a penalty shootout. He went the wrong way. Or they made the wrong choice. But it's interesting that he was known as the greatest strategist in the German camp. And he has Pallas rising. So he's seeing things with Pallas's eyes. He's seeing it with the strategic gaze. And with foresight.